It was the kind of April evening Chicago knew all too well, wind-raked and unforgiving, with sheets of cold spring rain blurring the street lamps into smeared halos. Elliot Ward tightened his trench coat as he stepped out of his Mercedes, rain droplets pattering off the brim of his hat. The gutters were overflowing, turning curbsides into miniature rivers. As he hurried up the steps to his townhouse, the chill pricked at his skin, but a deeper chill was already settling inside him. Caroline's Lexus was not in the driveway. For a moment, Elliot simply stood there in the rain, rainwater seeping into his expensive Italian leather shoes, confusion and an unnamed dread twisting in his gut. Caroline always parked her car in their garage by 6 p.m. Always. They lived in Lincoln Park, a safe neighborhood, and she rarely stayed out late on weeknights without telling him. Where is she? He wondered, heartbeat quickening. He tried to quell the anxiety with rationality. Perhaps she was running a late errand or caught up with a client at her architecture firm. Maybe she had texted. Elliot pulled out his phone and checked. No new messages from Caroline since mid-afternoon, when she'd simply sent, "Staying late at the office. Don't wait up, love you." He unlocked the front door and stepped into the house, greeted by silence and darkness. Usually, by this hour, Caroline would have Jazz playing softly in the kitchen as she prepped a light dinner, or he would find her curled up on the couch reviewing design proposals on her tablet. But tonight, the house felt hollow. Elliot flicked on a light and loosened his tie, forcing himself to breathe slowly. She said she's staying late, he reminded himself. It could be nothing. Except the creeping sense that it was something had lodged in his mind the moment he saw the empty garage. Water pooled at his feet as he stood in the foyer, indecisive. Caroline's text had come around 5 p.m. It was now nearing 8. If she was still at work, why wouldn't she at least come home for dinner or a change of clothes? Working late was one thing, but she'd never told him, "Don't wait up," before. That implied she might not come home at all tonight. The possibility made his stomach turn. He walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, ignoring the dinner for two he'd optimistically picked up from their favorite Thai takeout on the way. As he took a sip, his gaze fell on the little bowl near the microwave where they tossed their keys. Caroline's spare Lexus key fob gleamed there. Elliot set down his glass, a sudden idea forming. Caroline had insisted they exchange spare keys to each other's cars last year for convenience, in case one of them ever needed to move the other's vehicle. But modern key fobs did more than just open doors. They could sometimes track a car's last known location via the manufacturer's app. Elliot wasn't tech-savvy in the traditional sense, but as an executive at a private security consultancy, he had enough experience with gadgetry and intelligence tools. He recalled that Caroline's Lexus had come with an app she'd once shown off to him. "Look, it even tells me where I parked and the fuel level," she had exclaimed proudly. If he could access that app, maybe he could see where her car was right now. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but a justified one. Something is wrong kept repeating in his head. With determined steps, Elliot fetched Caroline's iPad from the living room. She often left it on the coffee table. His reflection flickered on the dark screen as he pressed the home button. To his relief, it wasn't password protected. Caroline had nothing to hide, or so he'd believed. The Lexus app was right there on her home screen. His finger hovered over it, a pang of guilt hitting him. Was he really about to track his own wife like a wayward employee? Another bolt of lightning flashed outside, illuminating the empty street beyond the window. He tapped the app. It prompted for a login. Frowning, Elliot tried Caroline's usual email and a couple of her common passwords. On the third try, her college nickname followed by 123, it logged in automatically. The app's interface popped up with a map. His heart thudded as he saw a blinking icon indicating Caroline's car. It was nowhere near her firm's downtown office. Instead, the map showed it parked at a commuter lot off Sheridan Road, all the way up on the north side near Evanston, miles from downtown. Elliot's brow furrowed. The Sheridan Road commuter lot? Why on earth would she be there? That area was near a suburban train line. People left their cars to take the L or Metra into the city. Caroline rarely took public transit, and if she had a site visit up north, she'd normally drive herself all the way. None of this made sense for a late night at her office. A gnawing suspicion began to take shape, a dark cloud forming in his mind to match the storm outside. He checked the app's timestamp. Caroline's car had been at that lot since 6:47 p.m., nearly 2 hours sitting there. Was she still nearby? If she took a train, she could be downtown by now. But why park there to go downtown when she'd started downtown at work? More likely she parked and then met someone. The thought made his mouth go dry. Who? A client from Evanston? A friend? If it was innocent, why not tell him? Elliot grabbed his coat again and slipped a small flashlight and his phone into his pocket. His movements were quick and precise, like a man heading to a job, not a husband chasing a hunch. Old habits from years of private security work died hard. Even rattled as he was, he moved with purpose. He paused by a side table in the hall where they kept a pepper spray canister and, incongruously, a compact digital camera they'd taken on vacation last summer. After a moment's hesitation, he snatched the camera too. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but evidence felt important suddenly. The drive to the Sheridan lot was a blur of rain and red taillights. Thunder rumbled overhead as Elliot navigated through slick streets onto Lakeshore Drive, then further north. He gripped the wheel tightly, jaw clenched, doing his best to stifle the scenarios flooding his mind. Caroline in trouble. Caroline in an accident. Caroline with someone else? He recalled the unease in her text. Don't wait up. There had been no tender joke, no apology for working late, just a directive. It was unlike her. Caroline was usually considerate, even playful, texting him silly gifts from the office or a photo of a late-night coffee when she had overtime. Tonight's message was almost businesslike. He tried calling her phone for the 5th time since he'd left the house. As before, it rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. No answer and no call back. Oh, he hadn't left any messages, unwilling to voice the worries swirling inside him. The one time she'd picked up earlier in the evening, around 7, she'd sounded hurried. She claimed she was still at the office, in the middle of reviewing blueprints with her team. But he had heard an echo that didn't sound like her studio. It was more like an open space or lobby. She'd quickly excused herself, promising to call later. Now, nearly 9 p.m. with no follow-up call, Elliot feared the worst. By the time he neared Sheridan Road, the torrential downpour had eased into a steady, cold drizzle. The commuter parking lot was mostly empty at this hour, just a few lonely cars glistening under the orange glow of sodium lamps. He killed his headlights and rolled slowly through the rows. It didn't take long to spot Caroline's sky blue Lexus GS at the far end, near a lamppost, unmistakable by the personalized license plate Coraline 1. Elliot's chest constricted at the sight of it. The car was parked neatly, undamaged, and empty. So she wasn't in it, at least. He pulled into a spot under a broken light about 50 feet away, with a clear view of her Lexus, but far enough to remain unnoticed in shadow. Rain drummed softly on the roof of his Mercedes. Elliot turned off the engine and checked the time. 9:14 p.m. He inhaled deeply, trying to calm the adrenaline that made his hands tremble ever so slightly. Think logically, he told himself. Caroline's car is here. If she's meeting someone, they might pick her up from here. Or if she took a train, maybe she'd be returning soon to drive home. A late North Suburb client meeting? He struggled to justify it, but his gut rebelled. He knew Caroline's project schedule. They often talked about her clients over dinner. Nothing up in Evanston was on her calendar that he could recall. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the silhouettes of trees beyond the lot. Elliot rubbed his eyes and decided to wait. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Each minute wound him tighter. The only movement was the rain rippling in puddles and the occasional hiss of a car on the main road beyond. He was about to get out and inspect her car when a flash of headlights caught his attention. A black sedan turned into the lot. Elliot shrank down slightly in his seat out of caution. The sedan glided through the rows, bypassing numerous empty spaces, heading inexorably toward the far end, toward Caroline's Lexus. Elliot's heart thumped painfully. The sedan slowed to a stop directly beside Caroline's car. From his angle, he could see it bore a low-number Illinois congressional license plate, the kind issued to members of the U.S. House of Representatives. His breath caught. Only one congressman he knew drove a black BMW with that distinctive plate number. Congressman Blake Wheeler. Elliot felt a surge of recognition and disbelief. Wheeler was a 3-term congressman representing one of Chicago's districts, charismatic, influential, and often on the local news. Elliot had met him once at a charity gala months ago, alongside Caroline. Wheeler had charmed their table with anecdotal wit and a wide smile. Caroline had later remarked what a surprisingly down-to-earth guy the congressman was. The memory churned in Elliot's stomach like poison. No, it couldn't be. His thoughts were cut off as he saw a figure dash through the drizzle toward the Lexus. Caroline. Even under the dim lamp, he recognized her poise and the beige trench coat that fluttered around her calves as she ran. She'd been waiting somewhere out of sight, perhaps under the station awning, and now hurried toward the cars. Umbrella-less, she clutched a leather portfolio over her head to ward off the rain. In the soft glow, he caught a glimpse of her face as she opened the Lexus's passenger door. She was smiling. Not the polite smile she gave colleagues or neighbors, but that smile, the warm, playful grin that had once been reserved for intimate moments with him. Elliot's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles ached. Instead of getting into her own car, Caroline leaned into the Lexus's back seat briefly, retrieving something, maybe an overnight bag, then closed it and moved to the black sedan. The driver's window rolled down. Through the drizzle, Elliot could just make out Wheeler's distinctive strong jaw and silvered temples as he leaned over to push the passenger door open for her. Caroline folded into the passenger seat of Wheeler's BMW without hesitation. Elliot's world tilted. A cold, leaden weight settled in his chest as the reality crystallized. His wife was getting into another man's car, a man who was a powerful public figure. The sight was intimate in its own way. There was an ease to her movement, as if this weren't the first time. Wheeler's hand lingered on her shoulder as she settled in, and then he pulled the car out of the lot. They hadn't seen him. Elliot had sunk back into the shadows of his seat, heart hammering in his ears. For a second, an almost overwhelming urge surged through him to stomp the accelerator, cut them off, confront them in the rain with headlights blazing and horn blaring. He imagined the look on Wheeler's face, on Caroline's, if he boxed them in and demanded answers right there. The betrayal ripped through him like a jagged blade, leaving raw anger and deep hurt in its wake. But Elliot Ward was not a rash man. Years in private security and intelligence consulting had trained him to tame his impulses, to observe and gather facts before action. Confrontation now would only tip them off, letting them possibly explain it away or go deeper underground. No. If Caroline was cheating on him with Congressman Wheeler, barging in rage tonight might satisfy his fury momentarily, but it wouldn't achieve justice. And justice was swiftly becoming all he could think about. He raised his phone with a steadiness that surprised even him and snapped a photo of the departing vehicles. The images were blurry through the rain-streaked windshield, but the license plates were clear enough. Caroline's Lexus left forlorn in the lot, and Wheeler's sedan exiting with her inside. Proof. Not of the full extent of betrayal, but a start. As the taillights of Wheeler's car vanished into the dark, Elliot exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Rain pounded harder once more, drumming on the car roof, matching the blood thudding in his ears. He lowered the phone, feeling a strange calm begin to overlay the chaos inside him. The initial shock was hardening quickly into resolve. There would be no dramatic showdown tonight, no tearful excuses or shouted accusations in the rain. Caroline had made her choice, and so would he. For a moment, he closed his eyes and allowed himself to feel the full sting of it. The woman he loved, the partner he had trusted for 10 years, slipping away into the night with another man. And not just any man, a public official who clearly should have known better as well. The humiliation burned in Elliot's chest, but he let that fire forge something new in him, a precise, unyielding determination. Elliot reopened his eyes. He pulled the camera from his pocket, double-checking that he had indeed snapped a photo on it as backup. The digital screen showed a grainy image of the two cars. Not terribly incriminating at a glance, just vehicles in a lot, but time-stamped and location-coded thanks to the camera's GPS. It was enough to place them together. He carefully stowed the camera and started his car. As he drove out of the lot, he saw in his rearview mirror Caroline's Lexus sitting solitary under the street lamp, rain drenching its windshield. A hollow feeling hit him. That car might remain there all night, he realized, implying she didn't plan to return home until morning. She had never done this before, as far as he knew. How long had this affair been going on? Questions swirled, but he pushed them down. There would be time to analyze everything soon. Back on the road, Elliot kept his speed steady, methodical, much like his racing thoughts. The betrayal was now undeniable, but he wouldn't let it consume him into despair. No, something else was growing alongside the pain. An idea, a plan forming in the back of his mind, like a puzzle assembling itself piece by piece. Caroline had ruined their marriage and their family in one fell swoop tonight. If he confronted her emotionally, she might just apologize, cry, or lie, whatever it took to escape real consequences. But Elliot had no intention of letting her walk away unscathed, and certainly not with the comfortable life they'd built together as if nothing had happened. As the city lights of Chicago blurred past in watery streaks, Elliot began mentally cataloging what he knew and what he would need to find out. His specialty at his firm was strategic security planning, identifying vulnerabilities, gathering intelligence, executing precise actions to neutralize threats. He had done it countless times for high-profile clients. Now he would do it for himself. The adversaries. Caroline Ward, once beloved wife turned betrayer. Blake Wheeler, esteemed congressman turned complicit homewrecker. The offense, not just infidelity, but a conspiracy of lies that mocked the trust Elliot had given freely. He felt a steely clarity settle in his mind. This would be treated like any other operation, meticulous, secret, and utterly devastating to its targets. By the time he eased his Mercedes back toward Lincoln Park, the rain had tapered off to a mist. Midnight approached. Instead of pulling into his driveway, Elliot steered to a nearby 24-hour pharmacy's parking lot and stopped there briefly, clicking off the engine. His eyes flicked to the glove compartment where he kept a small notebook. He opened it to a fresh page and, in the dim glow of the streetlight through the rain, began scrawling bullet point notes with the pen he always carried. 10:13 p.m. Photo evidence. Caroline entering Wheeler's car at Sheridan Lot. Action items. Identify all connections between Caroline and Wheeler. Events, calls, meetings. Access Caroline's work records, expenses, calendar. Pull public records on Wheeler's events. Find Caroline's presence. Leverage contacts, FBI, others, on exposing a congressman's misconduct. Legal counsel prepare divorce and any necessary court orders discreetly. Secure assets, accounts, house, etc. before confrontation. Elliot underlined that last point twice. The memory of Wheeler's hand on Caroline's shoulder flashed in his mind, and a surge of anger threatened his cool. He pressed the pen harder to the paper, almost tearing it. Betrayal might have broken another man, but for Elliot it had just unleashed a focused fury. If Caroline thought she could upend their life and walk away into a clandestine romance without repercussions, she was gravely mistaken. He snapped the notebook shut and exhaled slowly. This rainy night had delivered the cruel revelation, the discovery that shattered his world. But it also gave birth to Elliot Ward's next mission, to methodically, ruthlessly dismantle the lies and the people who lived them. He cast one last glance toward the north, in the direction of the Sheridan Road lot, his eyes cold. "Game on," he whispered into the empty car, his voice barely audible over the patter of rain on the windshield. Then he turned the key in the ignition and pulled back onto the road, disappearing into the darkness with a heart turned to stone and a mind already calculating revenge. Calculating the web. Over the next 10 days, Elliot transformed from a stunned, heartbroken husband into a cold, methodical strategist. In the privacy of his home office, door shut and headphones on to feign conference calls, he began assembling the pieces of Caroline's betrayal and planning how to dismantle her new fae. Aid. By day, he maintained his usual routine as best he could, going to work at the private security consultancy, keeping his tone measured on client calls, even managing polite small talk with colleagues. By night, however, Elliot became a man with a mission: to map out every lie, every secret meeting, every thread that tied Caroline to Congressman Blake Wheeler, and prepare to pull that entire web down in one surgical strike. Day 1. After discovery. The morning after that rain-soaked revelation, Caroline slipped back into their townhouse at dawn, likely expecting to find her husband still asleep. Elliot made sure to be up early, showered and dressed, pretending to peruse emails at the kitchen island with a half-finished cup of coffee. When Caroline opened the front door quietly at 6 a.m., she froze upon seeing him. For an instant, guilt flashed in her eyes before she composed herself. "Oh, you're up early," she said lightly, shrugging off her trench coat. Her hair was slightly damp, and she carried the leather portfolio he'd seen her use to shield herself from last night's rain. She looked tired. Elliot glanced up with what he hoped was a believable expression of mild surprise and concern. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, feigning a yawn. He noted the subtle tension in her stance and added, "You're just getting home? Everything okay?" Caroline busied herself hanging the coat, not meeting his gaze. "Yeah, the storm got so bad and it was so late." She hesitated only a split second before continuing smoothly. "I ended up crashing at Paige's place downtown. You remember Paige, my junior architect? We were both stuck late going over those condo redesigns, and I figured it was safer than driving back in that downpour." She offered a weak smile and finally looked at him as if seeking approval for the story. Elliot's stomach churned, but he kept his face neutral and concerned. "You should have called. I was worried," he said. And it wasn't even a lie. He had been worried, just not in the way she thought. Caroline walked over and gave him a peck on the cheek. Her skin was cool from the damp morning air. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "My phone died, and by the time we decided to stop, it was almost midnight. I didn't want to wake you." She flowed through the excuse smoothly, almost rehearsed. Elliot simply nodded and wrapped an arm around her briefly, careful not to stiffen at the deception. "It's okay. I'm glad you're safe," he said quietly, then added, "Pages, huh? Good idea. It was nasty out." Inside, fury coiled, but he stayed in character. He even managed a thin smile. "I left some Thai food in the fridge for you. You must be starving." Caroline exhaled in relief at his easy acceptance and gave him a warmer smile, one that, despite everything, still sent a pang through his heart. "You're the best," she said softly, squeezing his hand. Elliot just kissed her forehead and murmured something about getting ready for an early meeting. He left her in the kitchen, heating up last night's abandoned dinner, playing the role of the trusting, oblivious husband a little longer. But as he stepped into his car a few minutes later, having left her with a gentle goodbye, his jaw clenched. Every instinct screamed at him to demand the truth, to shout, "How could you?" But he quelled it. The time would come for answers, on his terms. In the office that day, between directing his team on a security audit project and sitting through conference calls, Elliot started his covert research. During lunch behind the privacy of his monitor, he scoured public records and social media for any intersection between Caroline and Congressman Wheeler. It didn't take long to find threads connecting them. On Wheeler's official congressional site and campaign pages, archives of past fundraising galas and donor appreciation events were readily available. Elliot combed through them relentlessly. One entry caught his eye: a charity art auction last November benefiting urban development, a cause Wheeler championed. Elliot remembered Caroline attending an industry networking night around that date, claiming she was representing her firm. Sure enough, buried in a local society blog's photo gallery was a picture of attendees clinking champagne flutes. And there was Caroline in the background, unmistakable in her emerald green dress, standing beside Congressman Blake Wheeler. The caption didn't name her, but the photo was evidence nonetheless. She hadn't mentioned meeting Wheeler that night, but here was proof she had been in his company. Elliot saved the image. One thread. He next searched donor event guest lists. High-profile fundraisers often listed notable attendees in press releases or programs. Wheeler had hosted at least a dozen events in the past year. Elliot found PDFs and press blurbs listing names of committee members and guests. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Caroline's name twice. Once listed as part of the hosting committee for a spring gala, something she'd never told him about, and another time as a guest at a private donor dinner in July. Hosting committee? Caroline wasn't even particularly political, or so she'd led him to believe. And a private donor dinner? Those were typically intimate gatherings for major supporters. What was she doing there? Each discovery was like a punch to the gut, but also fuel on the fire of his resolve. Elliot printed out the pages, highlighting Caroline's name. He started a physical file, something tangible he could hold and sort, in addition to digital copies. His home office desk, typically neat, became a strategic command center. Photos, printouts, scribbled notes linking dates and places. Day 3. That evening, after another quiet dinner where Caroline chattered about minor office dramas as if everything were normal, Elliot excused himself, claiming he had some late-night work for a client in a different time zone. Caroline didn't object. If anything, she looked mildly relieved that he was preoccupied. As she curled up in bed with an e-book, Elliot retreated to his office and shut the door. He turned off the lights, letting only the glow of his monitors illuminate the room, a habit from surveillance work to avoid anyone outside noticing activity through windows. Tonight's target: Caroline's work email and files. Getting into them would be risky, possibly illegal, but Elliot weighed that against the prize of solid evidence. Caroline's architecture firm, HLT Designs, used a web-based project management and expense system. He knew this because he had often heard her grumble about submitting digital receipts and filling online timesheets each week. Elliot had once helped Caroline troubleshoot that very system on her personal laptop, which meant at one point he'd seen her login credentials. He closed his eyes, recalling the memory. Her asking him to help attach scanned receipts, her typing in a password. It was about 6 months ago. She had typed a series of keystrokes he couldn't fully see from his angle. But Caroline tended to use a set of recurring passwords with slight variations. He jotted a few possibilities, including the one that got him into her Lexus app, her college nickname plus 123. Hands steady, Elliot navigated to HLT Design's employee portal and clicked Login. He entered her company email and the first password guess. Wrong. Invalid credentials. He tried the second variation, adding a E at the end, a common trick of hers. The screen buffered, then a new page loaded. He was in. A thrill of illicit triumph shot through him. He clicked on the expenses section. A list of expense report entries appeared, sortable by date. His eyes quickly scanned the recent ones. Several entries, all approved and reimbursed, jumped out. September 14th, taxi fare, late client meeting, $52. October 5th, dinner, client entertainment at Lakeshore Grill, $124. November 9th, car service fundraiser event, $67. December 7th, site visit, Evanston condo project, $0, mileage reimbursement claimed. January 18th, ride share, after hours meeting, $43. March 15th, just last week. Taxi, site consultation, midnight emergency, $48. Elliot's jaw tightened as he cross-checked these dates with a calendar. They were all Thursday nights. Every single one of those entries was for a Thursday near or after 11 p.m., judging by the context she provided or the amounts. Caroline had carefully labeled them to sound work-related, but the pattern was glaringly clear now. The Evanston condo project on December 7th leapt out. Evanston was exactly where he'd caught her meeting Wheeler in April. December 7th had likely been another tryst up north under the guise of work. Each expense was like a tiny confession hiding in plain sight. Elliot downloaded copies of the receipts attached to each report. The taxi receipts had pickup and drop-off locations. For example, the March 15th entry showed a pickup at 11:45 p.m. from the address of Wheeler's downtown congressional office, which he recognized, to their home address. Caroline had actually taken a taxi from Wheeler's office to their home late at night, then expensed it to her firm, calling it a site consultation. His hands shook with anger as he realized the brazenness. She'd come home to his bed from Wheeler's arms and charged her company for the ride. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe. If there was any doubt left of her affair, these documents obliterated it. She had turned her professional credentials and her employer's resources into cover for personal betrayal. That gave Elliot another angle. Caroline's firm would not take kindly to expense fraud or misuse of funds, especially if it implicated them in a potential scandal. He compiled all those PDFs and printed a second set for his growing file. Then, he meticulously annotated a timeline. Late September, claimed late client meeting, likely with Wheeler. Early October, dinner expense, a rendezvous dinner no doubt. Early November, fundraiser event, almost certainly one of Wheeler's political fundraisers. Early December, Evanston condo, perhaps a secret meetup location. A condo could even be a love nest Wheeler provided. January, after-hours meeting, another liaison, presumably. March, midnight site consultation. The boldest lie, directly from Wheeler's office to our home. And now April, just yesterday, which she hadn't had a chance to file yet, but no doubt she'd have invented an excuse for that too if given time. Elliot added the April date with a question mark to his log. By day 4, Elliot took a calculated step, contacting an old friend and former colleague with federal law enforcement connections. Sam Dwyer had been an FBI agent specializing in public corruption, though he'd left the bureau a couple of years back to start a private investigative firm. Elliot met Sam for coffee in a quiet loop cafe, choosing a corner table away from others. He knew Sam would be discreet. They chatted briefly about work and life, and then Elliot steered the conversation toward politics. Hypothetically, Sam, he said quietly, stirring his coffee, if someone had information about a U.S. congressman involved in, say, some financial or ethical misconduct, nothing like bribes, but things that look shady, would the FBI care? Or is that more a political hot potato? Sam raised an eyebrow. Hypothetically? Well, if it's evidence of a crime, the Bureau might care. But if it's more like ethics violations or misuse of funds, often that goes to the House Ethics Committee, or maybe DOJ Public Integrity if it's serious. Why do you ask? Elliot chose his words carefully, maintaining a casual air. Just something I came across through a friend at a law firm. Some irregular expense reports that might tie a business to a congressman. Could be nothing, could be something. Wasn't sure how one would handle that. I figured an anonymous tip to a watchdog or journalist might get the ball rolling. Sam nodded slowly. Anonymous tips happen all the time. If it's credible and detailed, and especially if there's any public money or campaign finance angle, authorities might look into it. Media can be an even faster trigger. A well-placed call or packet to a newspaper's investigative desk often lights a fire under these things publicly, which then pressures the ethics committee or others to act. Of course, the trick is not exposing yourself if you don't want to get caught in the blast. Elliot took a sip of his coffee, hiding the grim satisfaction he felt. Right. Anonymity is key. Last thing the friend wants is to get dragged in. But suppose this info also implicates a private citizen, like someone working at a company. What happens to them? Sam shrugged. If they were complicit in something unethical, they could become collateral damage. Might lose their job, reputation tarnished. Depending on what they did, if it's misuse of company funds or lying, the company might fire them or even press charges for fraud. But those are internal matters. As for the congressman, even a whiff of scandal and ethics violations can ruin a career. You don't need a criminal conviction. Public trust is everything for them. A newspaper headline reading Congressman so-and-so linked to misconduct could be the end of the line, especially if there's an affair or hypocrisy angle. That stuff can explode overnight. He said the last part with a sympathetic grimace, likely imagining the kind of mess such a scenario would be. Elliot forced a thin smile and nodded. Interesting. Good to know. Hypothetically, of course. When they parted ways, Elliot felt more confident. Sam had confirmed what he suspected. An anonymous tip to the press could ignite a conflagration that neither Caroline nor Wheeler would escape easily. And none of it would trace back to Elliot if he was careful. Days 5, 7. Elliot spent the following days refining his evidence and quietly tightening his control over personal affairs. On day 5, during an extended lunch meeting, he visited a divorce attorney, an aggressive litigator named Monica Fenton, known for her ruthlessness. Through a trusted contact at work who had dealt with a messy divorce, he got a same-day consultation under the pretense of seeking advice for a friend. But once in Monica's office, behind closed doors, he laid out the basics. His wife's affair, evidence of her financial misconduct, and his intent to file for divorce very soon. He didn't mention the congressman's name, referring to him only as a third party with potential legal and media exposure. Monica's eyes gleamed at the outline. She was clearly intrigued by the high-profile implications. Monica advised him on steps to protect himself and their shared assets before any confrontation. She explained that Illinois was a no-fault divorce state. Adultery wouldn't directly win him a larger settlement. But if Caroline had spent marital funds on her affair, or if her actions put their assets at risk, say potential lawsuits or IRS scrutiny, he could use that to justify freezing accounts or securing more favorable terms. Monica also mentioned that if he moved quickly, he could file for divorce and request a court order granting him exclusive use of the home and an injunction to keep Caroline away, citing circumstances to prevent further irreparable harm. It was an aggressive move, usually reserved for cases of domestic abuse or fraud. But with evidence of her deceit and misconduct, Monica believed a judge might grant it, at least temporarily. Elliot left the attorney's office with his head swimming in legal tactics and a stack of paperwork ready to be filed. He didn't file that day. Timing was everything. Instead, he kept those documents at the ready and made a checklist of what needed to align on the day he'd strike. The press tip, the HR packet, the divorce filing, account changes, lock changes, everything. By day 7, Elliot had quietly contacted his bank and separated half of their joint savings into a new individual account under his name only. He framed it to himself as safeguarding what was his from potential fallout. Caroline hadn't noticed. She rarely checked the accounts daily, and any electronic notifications were routed to his email, a setup they'd made earlier for convenience, which now served him well. He also obtained copies of all financial statements and credit card bills from the last year, combing for any charges related to the affair. Interestingly, Caroline had been clever. There were no obvious hotel stays or jewelry purchases he couldn't account for. It seemed Wheeler covered many expenses, or Caroline paid cash. The thought bitterly amused him. She was meticulous in cheating as well as architecture. Day 8, 9. Under the guise of a work project, he brought home a high-speed document scanner from his office. Late at night while Caroline slept, he scanned every printed piece of evidence he had gathered. The photos of her at events, her expense reports, the taxi receipts with damning addresses and times. Even a few flirtatious email exchanges he'd uncovered in her email archive. One from Wheeler's personal Gmail, reading innocuously, "Looking forward to seeing you Thursday." B. Elliot compiled the digital files meticulously into an encrypted folder on his laptop. He named the folder Final Exhibit, a grim smile touching his lips at the aptness. This would be the final exhibit in the case of Caroline's betrayal. Evidence to present not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion and personal reckoning. Each evening, after ensuring the digital backups were secure, on an encrypted USB drive stashed in his office safe, and another hidden in a safe deposit box he'd opened under his name alone, Elliot would double-check his timeline of events. He cross-referenced the Thursdays from the last 6 months with his own calendar and memories. Instances when Caroline had been absent or come home late with excuses. Sadly, everything matched too well. While he was traveling for a security conference in January, one of Wheeler's donor dinners had occurred. No wonder she'd encouraged him to attend that conference. On another Thursday, when he'd had the flu and was knocked out on medication, she'd slipped away to the office for a supposed crisis. That corresponded to that November art auction event. Piece by piece, the web of deception was laid bare. Caroline had crafted a careful double life, and Blake Wheeler had been right there with her in it. Throughout those days, Elliot maintained a careful mask around Caroline. It wasn't easy. She continued on as if nothing had changed, though he noted she was extra attentive in small ways. Perhaps guilt made her try to comfort him during his stressful workload. One night, she even rubbed his shoulders and remarked that he seemed tense, asking if everything was all right. Elliot forced a weary smile and blamed work. "Big client project. I'll be fine once it's done." She had accepted that explanation and urged him to get some rest. The irony almost made him laugh. She had no idea the real project consuming him was her. Still, there were moments when cracks nearly showed. Once he caught her texting late at night, smiling at her phone. When he casually asked who it was, she replied, "Oh, just Paige, gossiping about office stuff." Elliot merely nodded, his blood boiling as he imagined Wheeler's name on that screen. Another time, he found her researching weekend getaways on her laptop. She hastily closed the tab when he walked in. "Thinking of us maybe taking a short trip when things calm down at work," she had explained innocently. He played along with a polite nod, but mentally cataloged it. Perhaps a planned rendezvous with Wheeler under the guise of a business trip? Well, that trip was never going to happen now. Through it all, Elliot was a study in controlled anger and patience. Late at night, when he was alone with his evidence, he allowed himself to feel the hurt, briefly. He'd stare at a photo of Caroline laughing at that gala next to Wheeler, or reread one of her deceitful expense descriptions, and the betrayal would cut anew. But rather than wallow, he channeled it into perfecting his plan. By the end of the 10th day, Elliot was convinced he had everything he needed. His encrypted final exhibit folder held scanned copies of every damning document and image. A separate physical binder, tucked away in a locked drawer, contained printed copies for quick use. He had drafted an anonymous email to a particular investigative journalist at the Chicago Tribune, one who had written before about political corruption and would surely salivate over a tip implicating a sitting congressman. He had also prepared a neat packet of documents addressed to the HR director of HLT Designs, Caroline's firm, detailing how one of their senior architects was falsifying expenses. The letter within, written in a formal, anonymous tone, expressed a concerned employee's dismay at possible ethical lapses harming the company's integrity. Elliot reviewed the schedule once more, like a general reviewing battle plans. Thursday, 8 a.m. Send the anonymous email tip, with attachments, to the Tribune reporter's secure inbox. Thursday, 8:30 a.m. Have a courier deliver the sealed packet of evidence to HLT Design's HR director. Time to arrive by late morning. Thursday, 9 a.m. Visit the county court to file the divorce papers and secure the temporary injunction Monica prepared, so by afternoon they could be served. Thursday till noon. Monitor news updates. Ideally, the Tribune would by then be contacting Wheeler for comment, igniting chaos in his and Caroline's worlds. Thursday afternoon. Coordinate with a locksmith, quietly scheduled for 3 p.m., to change the house locks and ensure Caroline's personal items were packed and set aside. Thursday, 6 p.m. Serve Caroline the divorce papers and injunction via a process server or in person. At the moment, she'd be reeling from the day's events. Likely suspended or fired, reputation in tatters, and now the final blow at home. After that, walk away. He allowed himself a deep breath as he saved the final changes to his plans. It was elaborate, yes, and real life always held uncertainties, but he had contingencies. Every piece of this scheme was designed to strike Caroline and Wheeler swiftly, without giving them time to react in concert. They wouldn't have the chance to coordinate stories or hide evidence. By the time they realized what hit them, it would be too late. Late on Wednesday night, Elliot found himself standing in the doorway of his home office, surveying the space. The desk was now clear, all files either secured digitally or locked away. The walls bore no sign of the conspiracy he had uncovered. To any outsider, it looked like the tidy study of a meticulous man. Caroline was already asleep in their bedroom down the hall, likely tired from another long day at work, she had claimed. Elliot had barely spoken at dinner, citing fatigue, and she hadn't pressed. As he turned off his computer, his gaze fell on one last item. The small digital camera he had used on that first night in the rain, still sitting in a drawer. He powered it on and flicked through the images until the one from the Sheridan lot appeared. The blurred shape of Caroline getting into Wheeler's car, faint but discernible. The license plate of Wheeler's BMW gleaming under the lamplight. He could make out just enough of Caroline's profile in the passenger seat to identify her. It wasn't a high-quality picture, but it didn't need to be. It was for him, a reminder of why he was doing this. Elliot slipped the camera into his briefcase. Perhaps he would never need to show that photo to anyone, but it was comforting to know it was there. His raw memory made concrete, the inciting moment of this entire operation. He went to the bedroom and stood for a moment watching Caroline sleep. In the low light, her face looked peaceful, almost innocent. It struck him how strange it was that someone could wear betrayal so well by day and sleep so soundly at night. How long would that peace last, he wondered. A day more, 2 at most. Elliot felt no joy in what he was about to do. This wasn't about joy. It was about justice and consequences. He climbed into bed carefully, not disturbing her. Staring at the ceiling, he rehearsed tomorrow's plan in his mind one more time. Next to him, Caroline murmured softly in her sleep and turned over, draping an arm across his chest. Elliot stiffened at the unexpected gesture. In the darkness, he swallowed the lump in his throat. For a fraction of a second, a memory surfaced. The two of them 5 years ago on a beach in Maui, her falling asleep on his chest on a sunny afternoon, both of them blissfully happy and trusting. The ache of that recollection mingled with the cold anger in his heart. It's too late, he reminded himself silently, gently moving her arm aside. Whatever love had once been here, she had poisoned it. Come tomorrow, Caroline Ward's world would begin to crumble, piece by piece, lie by lie, and he would be the one wielding the sledgehammer. With that grim thought, Elliot finally closed his eyes. The spider had spun her web, and he had patiently mapped every strand. In a matter of hours, he would tug on that web and watch it unravel entirely. There was no turning back now. The surgical strike. The appointed day arrived on a gray, damp Thursday morning. A misty drizzle hung in the air, but unlike the violent storm of Elliot's discovery, this weather felt like the calm before a tempest he was about to unleash. Elliot woke early, his heart steady and mind clear. Everything was in place. At 7:55 a.m., seated at his kitchen table, Elliot opened his laptop. Caroline had left for work a half hour earlier, oblivious and preoccupied. He'd watched her pull out of the driveway with a terse goodbye, likely anxious about some morning meeting. If only she knew what the day held. In his drafts folder waited an email composed under a carefully crafted alias. The recipient, Niles Gardner, investigative reporter at the Chicago Tribune, known for digging up political scandals. The subject line read, Urgent Potential Congressional Scandal, Report Blake Wheeler. Elliot reviewed its contents one last time, though he knew it by heart. To the Tribune Investigations Desk, attached you will find documents and evidence suggesting that Congressman Blake Wheeler has been engaging in a covert affair with a Chicago business professional, Caroline Ward, and that this relationship involved misuse of corporate and possibly public resources. The evidence includes detailed expense reports from HLT Designs, Ward's employer, showing late-night site visits and travel expenses that coincide with Wheeler's fundraising events and meetings. Photographs and records indicating Miss Ward's attendance at multiple campaign donor events for Rep. Wheeler, not disclosed publicly. A pattern of potential ethical misconduct wherein a sitting congressman may have facilitated or been complicit in the misuse of company funds for personal rendezvous. This raises serious questions of impropriety and abuse of influence. This information is provided anonymously in the public interest. The enclosed files speak for themselves. A concerned citizen's 6 attachments were linked. A PDF packet containing Caroline's expense report excerpts with incriminating items highlighted. Photos of Caroline with Wheeler or at his events. A timeline cross-matching Wheeler's public schedule to Caroline's expenses, and a brief summary letter tying it all together. Elliot's finger hovered only a second before he clicked send. A quiet whoosh signaled the email leaving the outbox. He watched the progress bar blink, then closed the laptop. The first salvo was launched. Next, at 8:10 a.m., Elliot stepped out into the drizzly morning and walked a few blocks to a public mailbox on the corner. Inside, he deposited a large manila envelope, neatly sealed and addressed in careful block letters to Marjorie Lyle, HR Director, HLT Designs, Inc. He had prepared it the night before. It contained printed copies of Caroline's flagged expense reports, an anonymous letter detailing her serious breach of fiduciary trust and urging an internal audit, and even a USB drive with the digital files for good measure. By using a random street mailbox far from his normal routine, he ensured it couldn't easily be traced back to him. The envelope was sent priority overnight. Marjorie Lyle would receive it by late morning. Second salvo, en route. By 8:30 a.m., Elliot was behind the wheel, driving with calm deliberation toward the downtown Cook County Courthouse. On the passenger seat next to him was a folder with completed divorce papers and copies of the temporary injunction Monica had prepared. Monica had pulled strings to get an early ex parte hearing with a judge that morning. It was set for 9:15 a.m. Elliot's plan was to get the court's sign-off to bar Caroline from the house and to formally file for divorce, all without her knowledge until it was too late. Traffic was moderate. As he drove, Elliot glanced at the sky. The clouds were low and iron gray. A fitting backdrop, he mused, for the drama about to unfold. Mid-morning chaos. By 10:30 a.m., events were in motion across the city, unseen by each other, yet intimately connected by the threads Elliot had spun. At HLT Designs, Caroline was in her glass-walled office going over blueprints with an intern when her desk phone rang. Caroline Ward speaking, she answered briskly. Caroline, it's Marjorie Lyle from HR. Could you come down to the main conference room, please? Right away, came the voice of the HR director, cool and formal. Caroline felt a tiny prickle of anxiety. Sure. Is everything okay, Marjorie? But the HR director had already hung up. Puzzled and a touch uneasy, Caroline excused herself from the intern and headed to the elevators. A sudden summons from HR, so abruptly, she couldn't fathom why. Maybe it was the new benefits paperwork? Or perhaps a random internal audit? She had been careful with her expenses. A bead of sweat formed on her back as a stray thought hit. The expenses. No, they'd all been approved. She made sure her descriptions were thorough. It must be something mundane. She stepped into the conference room to find Marjorie Lyle seated alongside 2 other people. One was the firm's chief financial officer, and the other was a stern-faced woman from the legal department. An array of papers lay on the table. Caroline's heart skipped a beat. Have a seat, Caroline, Marjorie said, lips pressed into a thin line. Meanwhile, across town at the Tribune's offices, reporter Niles Gardner was already sifting through the trove of documents from a concerned citizen. He had received the email at 8 a.m. sharp and initially thought it might be some crackpot tip until he opened the files. Now he was in full bloodhound mode. Niles had quietly called a contact in HLT Design's accounting department, someone he'd dealt with for a previous story, to verify if the expense records looked genuine. The contact's startled reaction told him they were. By 10 a.m., Niles had alerted his editor and placed calls to Congressman Wheeler's D.C. office and Chicago district office, requesting comment on allegations of an improper relationship and misuse of resources. He also left a message on Caroline Ward's cell phone. He'd managed to dig up her number via a professional directory, asking for comment. No responses yet, but that was expected. He knew this story was explosive and the subjects would scramble. Back at the courthouse around 9:40 a.m., Elliot emerged from a brief hearing in Judge Phelps's chambers with a signed temporary injunction in hand. It granted him exclusive use of the Lincoln Park residence and legally barred Caroline from coming within 100 feet of it until further notice, citing urgent circumstances. It was an aggressive order, but Monica had argued convincingly about financial misconduct and potential volatility if Caroline learned of the divorce unexpectedly. The judge, a gruff old man with little patience for marital shenanigans, gave a curt nod and signed off. The divorce petition was also officially filed with the clerk. Elliot felt a momentary tremor in his gut as he walked out. This was the point of no return. He was now, in the eyes of the law, suing his wife for divorce. By 11 a.m., the first public tremors of the earthquake Elliot had set in motion began to appear. The Chicago Tribune published a breaking news alert on its website and social media. Breaking. Tribune Investigations has obtained documents suggesting Repshire Blake Wheeler, DIL, may have been involved in an undisclosed extramarital affair and related misconduct. Developing story. At Wheeler's downtown district office, the congressman's staff had just gotten off the phone with Niles Gardner. The normally confident Representative Wheeler was ashen-faced in his private office as his chief of staff relayed the reporter's pointed questions. Wheeler's mind raced. He had thought his relationship with Caroline was discreet, just a few whispers among close allies, but nothing concrete. How did a reporter get expense records? Who would have those besides Caroline or her company's accounting? Was Caroline talking? Impossible. She had as much to lose as he did. Could someone at her company have found out? Or, Wheeler cursed under his breath. Perhaps a political rival got wind of it. A primary challenge was brewing. This could be a hit job from an opponent. Blake, what do we do? They want comment by noon, the chief of staff pressed, breaking Wheeler's frantic thoughts. Wheeler tugged at his tie, trying to collect himself. Deny everything. Say these allegations are unfounded and I have no knowledge of any such misconduct. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. And get my attorney on the line. We need to see exactly what they think they have. He knew denying outright was risky if evidence was in hand, but buying time was essential. He also needed to reach Caroline immediately. Wheeler grabbed his personal cell phone and dialed Caroline's number. It rang and rang. No answer. He tried again, and on the fourth ring she picked up, voice hushed. Blake, I'm in a meeting, I can't, she began. Caroline, listen, Wheeler interrupted, keeping his voice low, though tension sharpened it. The Tribune's got something. They contacted my office. They mentioned documents, your expense reports, and us. They know, or they strongly suspect. They're going to run a story, maybe today. There was a strangled gasp on the other end. What? How? Caroline hissed, her mind spinning. She instinctively turned away from the table where the HR team sat, lowering her voice. It took her a second to process, but then pieces clicked. Expense reports, documents. At that moment, she looked down at the conference table, where Marjorie had just slid forward a stack of printed papers. Copies of her own expense submissions, complete with her signatures and notation, the very ones she thought were secret. Her blood ran cold. "Blake," she said, voice shaking now, "I think my company knows something too. I'm I'm sitting in an HR meeting. They have all my reports right in front of me." There was silence as Wheeler absorbed that double blow. This was far worse than he'd imagined. Whatever leak occurred, it hit both her work and the press simultaneously. It dawned on him that this was orchestrated. But by whom? "You didn't tell anyone about us, did you?" Wheeler asked sharply, panic edging his tone. "Of course not," Caroline whispered, wounded by the idea. She glanced at the HR faces, staring at her intently. She mouthed, "One moment," to them, and stood, stepping to the corner of the room as if to take a private call. No one stopped her. Why would I ever expose this? "I have everything to lose, Blake, just like you. This must be someone else. Maybe someone at work found out and tipped off the Tribune? Or could it be a political enemy of yours? I don't know." Her mind was racing, desperately trying to identify a culprit other than the obvious one she was too guilty to consider. Across the table, Marjorie and the CFO exchanged looks as Caroline carried on a furtive conversation. Her side of it was incriminating enough. It confirmed their worst suspicions. On the phone, Wheeler swore under his breath. "This is a coordinated hit. Listen, don't talk to any reporters. Deny everything to your people. Say it's a misunderstanding or something. I'll try to get ahead of this." He paused, lowering his voice further. "We'll talk soon. Hang in there." He disconnected before she could reply. Caroline slowly returned to the table and sank into a chair, feeling as though the room were closing in on her. Her pulse roared in her ears. The CFO spoke first, voice like ice. "Caroline, we have received evidence that you've been falsifying expense reports to charge personal activities to the company. These records," he tapped the stack of papers, "show a pattern of late-night taxis, dinners, and out-of-office events that do not align with any known client projects, but they do align with events involving Congressman Wheeler." The emphasis on the name was laced with disappointment and distaste. Caroline's mouth went dry. She glanced at the incriminating papers, each one a nail in her professional coffin. It's not what it looks like," she stammered weakly. Marjorie held up a hand. "Save it. This packet arrived anonymously this morning. Frankly, it speaks for itself." She flipped through a couple of pages. "We have you claiming company money for what appear to be personal outings, late-night outings, and misrepresenting them as business. Taxi rides from a U.S. congressman's office to your home, labeled as site consultations. Attendance at political fundraisers on the company dime. Caroline, this is a gross breach of trust and possibly fraud." Caroline's eyes welled. I can explain," she began, voice trembling. She felt panic rising as the scope of exposure sank in. Her career, her reputation, everything was teetering on the brink. The firm's legal counsel spoke up, tone hard. "There's no benign explanation for this. You misused corporate funds and lied on official reports. If you were seeing Congressman Wheeler personally and expensing related costs, that's an ethical and legal issue for us. And," the woman added, narrowing her eyes, "given the call you just took, it sounds like this is about to be a very public matter." Caroline's face burned with humiliation. A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I never meant to involve the company. It just—" Marjorie's expression remained stony. "Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay, pending a full investigation and audit. We will be reviewing all your communications and expense reports in detail. If these allegations hold, and frankly, it appears they will, we'll proceed with termination for cause." She slid a piece of paper across the table. "Here's a formal notice of suspension. Please hand over your company ID and laptop." Suspended. Likely to be fired. Possibly even sued for funds or reported to authorities. Caroline felt faint. Her hands barely worked as she reached into her bag for her ID card. It bore her smiling face, a cruel mockery now, and she placed it on the table. Then she gently laid her company-issued laptop beside it. Her reflection on its dark screen looked ghost-like. "We'll escort you to collect any personal items from your office," Marjorie said, softer now, but still firm. "It would be best if you do so quickly and quietly." Caroline nodded numbly. Shame and fear battled within her. There were so many consequences hitting at once, she could scarcely breathe. Her job in shambles, the Tribune sniffing around, Wheeler panicking, and her heart clenched. What about Elliot? He likely had no idea yet, but he would soon if this went public. The thought of her husband finding out like this, in the most humiliating way, made her stomach twist. She had to talk to him before he learned from others. Maybe she could still salvage something of their personal life. She had to try. Seeing Caroline's devastated silence, Marjorie stood. The informal interrogation was over. "Caroline, you'll receive a notice for a follow-up meeting once the audit is complete. I'm sorry it came to this." The words held little sympathy. Caroline managed a whisper. "I understand." She gathered her purse with trembling hands. The HR assistant was summoned, and soon Caroline found herself being guided back to her office like a disgraced student in school. Colleagues peeked from behind cubicle dividers and glass doors. News travels fast in an office. Clearly, rumors were already swirling. Caroline kept her eyes down, face flushed. She felt numb. In the span of a single morning, her carefully compartmentalized life had imploded spectacularly. By 11:45 a.m., she was standing on the sidewalk outside HLT Design's downtown building, a small banker's box of personal items in her arms, photographs, a coffee mug, a few books. The overcast sky mirrored her mood. She loaded the box into her car in a daze and slid into the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, not yet ready to start it. Only then did she break down, sobbing in great heaving waves that fogged up the windshield. When the worst of the tears subsided, Caroline pulled out her phone. She saw a missed call and voicemail from an unfamiliar number, likely that Tribune reporter. She deleted the voicemail without listening. She wasn't ready to face the media. She could barely face herself. Instead, she dialed Elliot's number. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then went to voicemail. She hung up, not leaving a message. What could she even say? "Hi, honey. I got suspended from work because I've been cheating on you with a congressman and it's all over the news." A ragged laugh escaped her lips at the absurd horror of it. She wasn't ready to confront him yet. She needed to think, needed to understand how much he knew or didn't know. Wheeler. She should call Blake again. Maybe he had an idea to contain this. She tried him. No answer. He was likely in crisis meetings with his staff or lawyers by now. Caroline felt utterly alone. She wiped her eyes and started the car. As she pulled away from the curb, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Through blurred eyes, she glanced at it. Architects' midnight excursions linked to Congressman Tribune exclusive. With shaking fingers, she tapped it. The article that loaded made her blood turn to ice. Chicago Tribune. Breaking news, 11:58 a.m. Architects' midnight excursions. Linked to Congressman Wheeler ethical storm brews. In a developing scandal, sources have provided the Tribune with documents suggesting Repier Blake Wheeler, D.Ill, engaged in an undisclosed relationship with a Chicago architect, raising questions about misuse of resources and ethical conduct. Expense reports from HLT Designs, a prominent architecture firm, indicate that Caroline Ward, 34, a senior architect, claimed work-related travel and outings that coincide with Wheeler's campaign fundraisers and meetings. Investigators are examining whether these excursions were personal in nature and if any public or corporate funds were improperly used. Repior Wheeler's office declined to comment, but insiders say a House ethics inquiry may be imminent. Ward's employer confirmed an internal review of a personnel matter is underway. Political analysts note that even the appearance of such impropriety could jeopardize Wheeler's career. More as this story develops. Caroline's vision swam. They'd named her. They'd named her firm. Everything was out. A photo accompanied the piece. A shot of Wheeler at a gala, and there in the background was Caroline, her face turned slightly toward him, a glass of champagne in hand. The Tribune had helpfully circled her in red. It was undeniably her. A fresh wave of tears threatened. Caroline threw her phone onto the passenger seat as if it burned her. The humiliation was now public, beyond recall. She felt sick. And Elliot, if he didn't know before, he would know now. Perhaps he was seeing these alerts as they popped up. Perhaps his co-workers were reading about Caroline Ward and connecting the dots to him. She imagined him getting a dozen sympathetic or shocked messages. How could she ever explain herself to him? She realized she had to confront her husband before he learned any more, if there was even a slim chance to salvage their personal life. Wiping her cheeks, Caroline started driving aimlessly, then steadied her route toward home. I need to see Elliot, she thought. I need to beg for forgiveness, or at least explain. Maybe he hadn't seen the news yet. Maybe she could get in front of it with him. It was a feeble hope, but it was all she had. Afternoon fallout. Around 3 p.m., a light rain began to fall again, as Caroline's Lexus pulled onto the familiar tree-lined street of their neighborhood. Her heart pounded. She rehearsed in her mind how she might start. Elliot, I made a terrible mistake. I never meant to hurt you. Everything's blown up and I'm so sorry. It sounded woefully inadequate. Elliot's silver Mercedes was in the driveway, which meant he was home early. Of course, today he had all his tasks front-loaded and likely finished the legal errands by early afternoon. Inside the house, Elliot had indeed been busy. The locksmith he scheduled had finished changing every exterior lock about 15 minutes earlier. The house was now effectively sealed from Caroline's access. In the foyer, several cardboard boxes sat taped and labeled, filled with Caroline's clothes, shoes, toiletries, and personal effects that Elliot had swiftly and coldly packed after returning from the courthouse. He wanted nothing of hers left in plain sight by the time she arrived. Elliot himself was standing in the living room, phone in hand. He had just read the updated Tribune article which now splashed Caroline's name in the headline. It was spreading fast. Even cable news crawlers were picking it up. He felt a grim sense of completion. Everything he set out to do was unfolding. His phone buzzed with a text from Monica. Tribune piece looks brutal. Papers filed smoothly. Process server on standby. Your call if you want him to serve or if you'll do it personally. Stay safe. Elliot had opted to handle the final handoff himself. He wanted to see the look in Caroline's eyes when she realized he knew everything and that her new reality was irrevocably set. Through the front window, he saw the sky-blue Lexus turn the corner. He pocketed his phone and positioned himself in the foyer, a manila envelope in hand. Inside it, the divorce petition and the injunction order. He heard Caroline's car door slam, then hurried footsteps up the path. A key jiggled in the front door lock, once, twice. Of course, it failed. Outside in the drizzle, Caroline's anxiety spiked when her house key refused to turn. She tried again, rattling the knob. Nothing. She frowned, bewildered and increasingly alarmed. Had the lock jammed? With a sinking feeling, she remembered the article mentioning an injunction. Could Elliot have already? She knocked, first softly, then more urgently. Elliot? She called, voice already pleading. Elliot, are you there? Please, open the door. We need to talk. For a long moment, there was no sound but the rain. Then, the sharp clack of the bolt. The door opened a mere few inches, halted by the still engaged security chain. Through the small gap, Caroline could see her husband's face. Elliot regarded her coolly. His dark eyes were unreadable, his expression unsettlingly calm. Relief and fear collided in Caroline's chest. "Elliot," she began breathlessly. "Thank God. I have to tell you." He cut her off, voice quiet and devoid of warmth. "No, you're not coming in, Caroline." His words stunned her. She blinked raindrops from her lashes. What? Elliot, please. It's raining. He reached up, slid the security chain off, and opened the door fully, but then stepped into the doorway, blocking her path. One hand remained on the door. The other held the manila envelope. Caroline noticed the envelope bore her name typed on a label. Despite the dread churning in her stomach, she tried to muster a shaky smile, reaching out toward him. "I know you've probably heard things. I can explain, but not like this. Can we just—" "Take this," Elliot interrupted. He extended the envelope toward her. His face was stony, offering no hint of anger or sadness, just cold resolve. Caroline didn't move at first, so he let the envelope fall at her feet. She flinched. Slowly, she bent and picked it up, her hands trembling as she sensed what it might contain. She pulled out the sheaf of documents inside. Her eyes widened, scanning the top page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her name as respondent. Words like irretrievable breakdown. Then another paper. A court order forbidding her from the residence. Her vision blurred with tears of shock. You filed for divorce?" she croaked. The full reality crashed down. Elliot knew. Maybe he'd known for days. And he wasn't just leaving. He had actively locked her out and shut her down. Caroline's lips trembled. "Elliot, did you do all this? The Tribune? My job?" It was a desperate question, half disbelief, half accusation. Elliot's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes," he said, voice low. "I did." Caroline swayed on her feet, a hand gripping the doorframe for support. For a moment, anger flared through her devastation. "You ruined me!" she burst out. "My job, my reputation, everything! Why couldn't you just have confronted me? We could have—" Her voice cracked. "We could have handled this privately, but you chose to destroy all of it." Elliot's eyes flashed, the first sign of emotion. "Handled it privately?" he repeated, a bitter edge slicing through the calm. "After you publicly made a fool of me? After you used our life and your company to hide your affair?" He shook his head slowly. "No, Caroline, that wasn't enough. You betrayed me, betrayed our marriage, our home. You don't get to slip away with a quiet apology and a clean slate." Tears streamed down Caroline's face, mixing with the drizzle. "I know I hurt you," she sobbed. "I know, but this—" She gestured weakly with the envelope of legal papers. "This is so final." Elliot remained unmoved, like a statue in the doorway. "It is final," he said. "You made sure of that the moment you stepped into his car." Caroline wilted. She wanted to protest, to plead that it had been a mistake, that she never meant to fall into an affair, that she was confused or lonely or any number of feeble excuses. But looking at Elliot's face, she knew none of it would matter. He had the implacable look of a man whose trust was utterly shattered and who had exacted his price for it. She tried one last time, voice small and broken. "Elliot, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I never wanted—" A sob cut her off. "I never wanted to lose you." For a fraction of a second, Elliot's expression flickered, some subtle pain under the surface. But it hardened again almost instantly. "You already lost me," he said quietly. "It just took me a little while to find out." Caroline covered her mouth to stifle a wail. This was it. Their marriage reduced to ashes at their front door in the rain. Elliot stepped back. "There's nothing more to say. You should go." He looked past her, down the steps. "I had your things packed." He nodded toward the side of the porch, where Caroline now noticed 2 sealed boxes under the awning. "You can pick them up when you're ready." They'll be in storage after tomorrow. She followed his gaze and let out a despairing breath. Her life with him was literally packed in boxes. There was finality in that image that shook her to her core. Where? Where am I supposed to go? She whispered, wiping her face with a sleeve. Elliot's tone remained flat. That's not my concern. Maybe ask your congressman. The words landed with cruel precision. Caroline shut her eyes as if struck. She had no response to that. In truth, she had nowhere to go in this moment, except perhaps a friend's couch. Wheeler certainly couldn't be seen harboring her now. He was likely distancing himself to save his own skin. Seeing she was out of fight, Elliot gave a curt nod. Goodbye, Caroline. With that, he stepped back and closed the door firmly. Caroline stood there, staring at the closed door, drenched and trembling. She wanted to scream, to pound on it until her fists bled, to somehow turn back time and undo everything. But she knew it was futile. Finally, clutching the envelope and her shattered dignity, she gathered the two boxes into her arms one by one, loading them into her car with what little strength she had left. As she pulled out of the driveway, she cast one last glance at the house through the rain-streaked window. The home that had been hers, full of love and laughter not so long ago, was now dark to her, literally and figuratively. A fresh surge of grief rose, but she choked it back, pressing the accelerator. She had no choice now but to move forward into an uncertain, likely very lonely future. Inside the foyer, Elliot watched through the peephole until Caroline's car disappeared down the street. He released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were shaking just a bit, adrenaline from the confrontation coursing through him. It was the first and only direct confrontation he'd allowed himself. And now, it was over. The house around him felt still and silent, save for the faint ticking of a clock in the hall. Elliot remained by the door for a long moment, allowing himself a single, long exhale. It was done. No more lies, no more charade. He had delivered the consequences with precision, and now the rest was out of his hands. The house around him was silent, strangely empty yet cleansed. He glanced at the stacked boxes of Caroline's belongings by the wall, the ones she hadn't taken. They would be removed soon enough. For now, Elliot simply stood in the foyer and let himself breathe. A heavy chapter of his life had closed, and whatever came next, he would face it on his own terms. Aftermath in the dark dawn broke on Friday, with Caroline Ward's name splashed across the front page of the Chicago Tribune. The headline ran in bold letters, Architect's Midnight Excursions Linked to Congressman. The story detailed how an anonymous tip had led to revelations of an affair and potential ethics violations, rocking the careers of both a prominent architect and Congressman Blake Wheeler. By then, Wheeler's office had gone completely dark. He had canceled a planned appearance that morning and instructed staff to give no comments as the political fallout mounted. HLT Designs, Caroline's firm, issued a public statement before noon, declaring that Caroline Ward had been terminated for ethical violations and misuse of company funds. The scandal was the talk of Chicago and D.C. alike. Elliot watched the final phase of his plan unfold from the quiet comfort of his sleek new apartment, just 2 blocks away from the old house. He had decided he wouldn't spend another night in the home he once shared with Caroline. After she left the previous evening, he locked up the Lincoln Park house, left a set of keys on the kitchen counter for his lawyer, and walked away without a second glance. In anticipation of this moment, he had leased a furnished high-rise loft nearby a week ago, a place to start fresh, free from painful memories. Now, in the pre-dawn dimness, Elliot sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of that loft, the city lights flickering below. He poured himself a neat bourbon and took a slow sip, letting the amber warmth settle in his chest. On the glass coffee table before him lay his laptop, open to the Tribune's digital front page. His eyes skimmed the article's text, which recapped the whirlwind events. The leaked expense reports, the swift corporate response, the mounting calls for a house ethics inquiry. It even speculated that Wheeler's political future was in serious peril. and noted that sources said Wheeler was considering stepping down from a committee assignment. Elliot took no joy in another man's downfall per se, but he felt a grim satisfaction that Wheeler wouldn't escape unscathed. Elliot set down his glass and clicked an icon on an encrypted flash drive plugged into the laptop. The familiar folder labeled Final Exhibit opened, revealing all the files he had gathered, the photos, the PDFs, the timeline, each one a chapter of the saga that had now played out in public. He gazed at the file names, recalling the long nights he spent compiling them. Their job was done. With a faint sigh, he closed the folder and then shut the laptop's lid. In the reflection of the dark screen, he saw himself and the faint glow of dawn behind him. He realized he felt calm. More than calm, vindicated, and finally at peace. Elliot leaned back and watched as morning light slowly crept into the sky, pushing away the remnants of night. In a few hours, he would head to his office as usual. There were clients who needed his attention, a team to manage, and a life to live. There would be legal formalities to finalize the divorce, and likely he'd have to endure curious glances or gossip from those who connected him to the scandal. But he found that none of that troubled him much. The hardest part was over. He had faced betrayal head-on and delivered justice in return. He stood and wandered to the open kitchen, topping off his glass with a bit more bourbon. Today, he suspected, he would receive sympathetic outreach from friends, those who saw the news and realized Caroline Ward was his wife. He was preparing mentally for that. A simple statement, perhaps, that they were divorcing and he'd appreciate privacy. Most would respect that. Elliot returned to the living area and set the bourbon on the table. On a whim, he picked up the USB flash drive marked Final Exhibit. This little device held the fruits of his meticulous 10-day operation. It was, in effect, the weapon he'd forged and used. He turned it between his fingers thoughtfully. Perhaps he would erase the data soon or tuck the drive away in a safety deposit box. The evidence had served its purpose, and he felt no need to cling to it. He wasn't worried about any blowback. He had been careful to remain anonymous and within the bounds of the law's gray areas. He placed the flash drive back on the table and took another slow sip from his glass. Far below, a few pedestrians were already out, hustling along the wet sidewalks with umbrellas and coffee cups. Life in the city was moving on, indifferent to the personal drama that had consumed him. Elliot realized he too was ready to move on. Surprisingly, the overwhelming emotion he felt was not rage or sorrow, but relief. He had not crumpled in the face of betrayal. He had acted, decisively and intelligently. In doing so, he had reaffirmed his own strength and values. There was pain, yes, the loss of the woman he once loved and the life they had. But that pain was tempered by the knowledge that he had not allowed that betrayal to destroy him. Instead, he had confronted it, mastered it, and dispensed his own form of justice. He walked to the window, one hand in his pocket, and gazed out at the awakening city. The rain had stopped, and the clouds were beginning to thin, revealing streaks of pale gold morning light. In the distance, Lake Michigan's waters were gray and calm. For a fleeting moment, Elliot thought of Caroline. Where was she now? Perhaps at a friend's house, curled up in shame and regret. Or maybe with her parents, trying to explain the unexplainable. He found that he didn't envy her. In fact, a part of him pitied her fall from grace. But then he remembered the months of deceit, the nights she'd kissed him after being with Wheeler, the contemptible ease with which she'd lied. Any pity was quickly eclipsed by a sense of rightness that she faced consequences. And Wheeler, likely ensconced in his Washington office or home, plotting some way to salvage his career or bracing for an ignominious resignation. Elliot didn't care much what became of him beyond this. If asked privately, he'd say Wheeler got what he deserved for abusing his power and praying where he shouldn't. The court of public opinion would judge the congressman now. Elliot took a final sip of bourbon, savoring its smooth burn. He felt the tension in his shoulders finally easing. The chapter was closed. His actions, extreme as some might view them, had ensured that betrayal did not prevail without justice. He hadn't resorted to violence or anything unlawful. He had simply taken the truth and weaponized it, precisely and effectively. In a way, it was beautiful, an elegant solution born of an ugly situation. He placed the empty glass down and noticed his laptop screen had gone completely dark, blanking out the Tribune site. In that black mirror, he saw himself standing tall, no longer with the weight of uncertainty hanging over him. Perhaps there would be lonely days ahead. The house would be sold, the divorce would proceed, and he'd have to rebuild aspects of his personal life. But he would do so on his terms, without lies shadowing him. Elliot allowed a faint, weary smile to touch his lips as he glanced once more at the closed laptop and the flash drive, symbols of this saga now at rest. He had refused to be a victim. He had orchestrated a precise, unrelenting retribution that left no loose ends. He turned away from the table and headed toward the bedroom to get ready for the day. Sunlight was peeking through the edges of the curtains. In his chest, he felt a weight lift, and something like hope take its place. There would be no confrontation beyond what had already occurred. There would be no forgiveness asked or given. In the story of Elliot and Caroline, he had written the final act exactly as it needed to be, with truth exposed and justice served. And as Elliot Ward stepped forward into the light of a new day, he did so vindicated and unburdened, a husband betrayed who delivered his own justice and refused to look back.